We have Alexei Pechi with us, a political scientist, journalist, international observer, and representative of Ukraine. We will talk not only about Ukraine, but also about how the entire international situation looks in Alexei's eyes. Hello, Alexei. We are glad that you are with us once again.
Hi, Evgeny. Great to hear and see you too.
Alexei, when we were discussing the topics with you, we planned to talk about peaceful Trump, Trump's peace plan for Israel. Let's do it this way. Briefly outline this story for us. What is it? How did the ceasefire come about so quickly? What's going on with all of this? When will the hostages be released? This person deserves a Nobel Prize.
So let me start with the Nobel Prize. He couldn't have received it this year. I'm a bit tired of repeating this point. He couldn't. Procedurally, he couldn't have received the Nobel Peace Prize because those who received it this year, those who were nominated for this prize this year, were nominated before January 31, 2025. All nominees will go in 2026. About why it happened so quickly. Actually, if we carefully follow what's happening in the Middle East, this didn't happen quickly. It was a whole process that needed to be watched closely. And as always, we need to look a bit more broadly and expand our view from the Gaza Strip and Israel much further to the Middle East, to the Arab world. Because in fact, right now, the main patron, I would say, of Hamas is Qatar. Qatar, it basically supported Hamas for some period of time, but now it has taken it under its wing, you could say. Also follow related news. Literally at the beginning of October, or more precisely at the end of September, first Donald Trump meets with the leaders of Arab countries. And after that, at the beginning of October, he announces security guarantees for Qatar, similar to Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Many were shocked, as many Arab countries view this with envy. This also applies to Saudi Arabia, which has long sought security guarantees from the United States, but is still refused for some reason. And Qatar suddenly gets these guarantees. And if you go and read the decree of the President of the United States of America, you'll see. It is clearly stated there that in the event of an armed attack, the United States of America will defend the state of Qatar just as they would defend the United States itself. It's like saying this is already an equal sign. And then we'll see the next piece of news, which was literally on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. The United States of America and Qatar are signing an agreement under which the Qataris are essentially building a military facility in the state of Idaho. This is something unusual, probably for the first time in modern history, when the Pentagon allows a foreign country not only to send its military personnel to the territory of the United States, but also, in fact, to build a military base. And now Qatari pilots will be gaining experience on F-15 aircraft on American soil at an American air base that they are building from scratch themselves. As you know, Qatar is the main mediator in negotiations between Israel and Hamas. So in my opinion, everything ties back to Qatar. Qatar provides guarantees on its part that it keeps Hamas in check, not allowing them, to move into new categories, some kind of military provocations. But on the other hand, I would say that in this situation, both Israel and Hamas, I'll say this very carefully, each side won to some extent because both had to give up their maximalist goals. But at the same time, each side gained something from this. Israel, of course, you could say, has set Hamas back for years and years, completely degraded this organization. Most importantly, they are freeing the hostages. But in fact, the structure of Hamas remains. It hasn't gone anywhere yet. In this sense, I would say that they have to retreat. Hamas, to some extent, yes, it has also been severely battered, but it still remains, and it remains most likely as a political force. Will Hamas be disarmed? I believe so. Everything points to the fact that they will eventually lay down their arms, but as a political part of governing the Gaza Strip, they will remain. I'll just say most likely it will be a rebranding under some new name, and again, Qatar will facilitate this. That is, Qatar has taken on the responsibility that post-war Gaza will be under its supervision. That means other Arab countries will also be involved. For example, there will be American military monitoring, enforcement of the ceasefire, and so on. Qatar is essentially the main Arab country handling these responsibilities. If Hamas disarms, where will they do it? What do you think? Look, where will these weapons go? Will they hand them over to Israel? No, of course not. Will they give these weapons to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or others? Also, no. Basically, Hamas has already stated this. They will hand the weapons over to Egypt for safekeeping. And Egypt, let me remind you, in the 7-Day War in 1967, yes, well, did they actually help Hamas in the struggle for the rights of the Palestinian people? Hamas didn't exist then. A viewer just pointed that out. But Egypt did generally support the Palestinian movement at that time. So it's a very tricky question here. Obviously, in the short term, we're going to see another historic attempt to end the war in the Gaza Strip, stabilize the region, and establish some kind of adequate authority there. But it's very difficult to do this. And history shows us both the Camp David Accords and the Oslo Agreement. And there have been several other attempts to do this. And every time these attempts have failed, they failed. Again, I'm probably going to bring anger upon myself because the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip cannot, let's say, live independently. They cannot provide for themselves. Due to the existing geographical features, the blockade by Israel, and to some extent the blockade by Egypt, there are plenty of arguments that can be made as to why this is the case. But the Palestinian population itself cannot support itself. It has always been supported either by Israel or by Egypt. And if we now imagine a situation where the Gaza Strip is suddenly freed from Israeli occupation and so on, someone still has to provide for it. Well, if Qatar takes on the responsibility of supporting this region, maybe it will work. It might finally work, but again, how long will it last? In 2005, Israel fully withdrew from the Gaza Strip, removing both its military and settlements. But 2 years later, Hamas emerged. Hamas became more radical and declared the destruction of Israel as its goal. We ended up with what we have now. So in the short term, yes, I think they might sign a peace agreement as soon as tomorrow. The war will stop. But how long it will last is still an open question.
Alexei, thank you for such a wonderfully detailed comment. While you were explaining what's happening, you actually took my thoughts away from what I originally wanted to discuss with you. Now, a new topic has come up. It's really interesting. But why suddenly Qatar? Why did this happen? Why? Does this mean their military pilots will now be trained in the United States? Why such strong guarantees? Maybe you have some answer to this question? What specific interest does the United States have in this country or region? Is it oil reserves? Why so abruptly? What benefits do the United States get from this? And couldn't the same agreement have been reached, for example, with Saudi Arabia? Tell them, let's sign an agreement with you, and then you'll take care of everything there in the Gaza Strip.
Look, this is a very interesting question you're asking now about Saudi Arabia. If we remember October 7th, 2023, many analysts and politicians insisted that the Hamas attack, supported by Iran, was directly related to the fact that the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia were very close to signing a global agreement in which the Saudis would recognize Israel as an independent state and establish a partnership. Everything is great. Saudi Arabia even gets nuclear technology from the United States, military assistance. Well, let's put assistance in quotes because they actually buy this American weaponry and so on. Hamas attacks Israel in 2023. What happens next? I would say the hostage of rhetoric declares that until the war in the Gaza Strip is over, until the Palestinian state is recognized, we are not going to sign any Abraham Accords. There will be no rapprochement with Israel. These are our conditions. And then when the war was already underway and it became clear that Iran and its proxy forces were clearly losing in this confrontation, many Arab countries simply cannot come out now and say, we've changed our minds, so let's roll back our demands, for example, regarding a Palestinian state for 5-10 years, and then finally move closer to Israel. They can't do that, and neither can Egypt. Egypt remembers very well the history of the Six-Day War when they stood up for the Palestinian resistance, and they remember the state Egypt was in when it entered the Six-Day War and the state it was in when it came out of the Six-Day War. But just a few years later, when the Camp David Accords were confirmed and signed, they got the Sinai Peninsula back. That's why Saudi Arabia couldn't sign anything, because their position had already been stated. Qatar acted much smarter, much more rationally, because Qatar never loudly stated any conditions during all this time. They stated that, yes, we support the Palestinian people, but at the same time we support, for example, Hamas's political wing was always in Turkey. It was in Doha, just sitting there calmly. And Qatar actually took the position of a negotiator, the position of a mediator. That is, Qatar is a state that is also a representative of a Persian Gulf country in the Arab world. Strategically, it has an excellent location, both geopolitically and militarily. That's why the United States had a choice between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Remember, there's a large American military base in Qatar. It's been there for many years already. And Qatar has always been more in the shadows, because Qatar has always taken the position of a mediator, an observer, a country that supports the Arab world, but at the same time doesn't intend to quarrel or break off relations with anyone because of it. And in the end, I don't know if I can put it that way, the stars just align in such a way that Qatar is the only country in the Arab world that can take on the role of a mediator, a neutral player, and also as a guarantor that they can somehow restrain Hamas. For the Americans, another advantage here is that, in fact, if this happens, then Iran finally loses its influence over its proxy forces. There is hope that these proxy forces will simply come under the silent control of Qatar. Qatar isn't a saintly country either. We have to remember that Qatar has often been accused of using proxy force tactics in the region in the same way to pursue its own interests. It's not a very large country geographically. That's why Qatar simply built its geopolitical strategy correctly. And as a result, Qatar is probably becoming the key ally of the United States now, along with Israel. But Saudi Arabia is on pause right now, unfortunately for them. Because now all they can do is wait, observe the process, and wait for the moment when the issue of the Gaza Strip cools down a bit in the rhetoric. And then these issues can be raised again while building relations with Israel and the United States.
Alexei, thank you. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. And who else but you should we ask to find out what's happening in the East? We have plenty of specialists on the Western regions here. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon on our broadcasts. Thank you.
Thank you.